Treasury Minister. No, not Chancellor.
Minister for Women in the
And James Heale, next to her, is Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. To my left, Anna Sabine, Liberal Democrat MP for Frome and East Somerset. She's the party's culture, media and sport spokesperson. And as she tells me earlier, she cut the legs off Jacob Rees-Mogg in the last election because she got half of his constituency, didn't he?
I got the best half.
The best half, OK. And next to her is Dame Chi Onwurah, who's Labour MP for Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West, and is the chair of the Commons Science, Innovation and Technology Committee. They're here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text on 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Let's kick off with a text question from Scott in West Hampstead. At today's Downing Street meeting between Sir Keir Starmer, President Zelensky and the leaders of France and Germany, they discussed the need for hard-edged security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. But the Trump administration appears to be more on Russia's side than on Ukraine's. So who needs to do what to ensure that Ukraine's future security is protected? A really nice, easy question to start with. Justine.
Europe needs to step up on defence. I think it needs to understand that Trump is not going to necessarily lead an American support for the EU. He's made that very clear, actually, in the foreign policy strategy document that the White House released today, which is just 33 pages. But very, very clear cut that it is an America First strategy. It is about American sovereignty, and everything, including Europe, is looked at through the lens of what does this mean for the US? Will it combat migration to the US? Will it make the US economy more stable, etc.? Therefore, I think that's just the simple reality that, and again, in that strategy document, it sets it out again that one of Trump's big achievements already, it's not even a year in since he went into the White House, amazingly.
Seems like a decade.
Has been to get more commitments on NATO spending. And so I think it's up to the Europeans to look after Europe. I think that is just the simple reality of it. How it's done is something entirely different. But you know, it is down to Europe to look after Europe now.
Do you think that message has got through, though?
Partly, but I think there's a broader issue here, which is that we have seen, I use that maybe in a past tense, present tense, the degradation of the post-war settlement. You know, the institutions that we put in place at the end of the Second World War to protect a wider world from the weak nations, if you like, from stronger nations, NATO, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, etc. Basically, America's signaling that it is less interested in those supranational structures now. It is just simply interested in its own sovereignty. And therefore, we're not part of this international rules-based order, and we shouldn't expect it to be something that we can rely on in the future. These are tough messages for all of us, but I think they are the reality, and I think you succeed in life by confronting reality and working out how to deal with it, not by pretending it's not just happened.
OK, Chi.
Well, I don't think you'll find much disagreement on this. I think fundamentally Ukraine's future has to be decided by Ukraine. But I agree with Justine very much, and I see that our future, Europe's future, British future is tied up with the future of Ukraine. Because if Russia wins this war, if Russia gets territory from Ukraine that it hasn't been able to win on the battlefield through negotiations and through that I think that will place us. I will feel less secure in this country and in this continent as a consequence of that. And it's an irony that President Trump is the impetus to drive Europe to recognise that we do have to be able to defend ourselves, and that's something over decades, that we haven't made the commitment in terms of our defence expenditure to do. But we do have to recognise that it's incredibly difficult. We just saw what's in the budget, the economic pressures on the UK, and it's the same across Europe. But if Putin wins in Ukraine, then I don't believe he will be satisfied with that. I think there are geopolitical and other pressures on him and on Russia, which will lead to a future extension. So we've got to support Ukraine in its self-determination, but we've got to recognise that our future, our security, is bound up with that.
But we've had many European leaders mouth the words about increasing defence expenditure. But how many actually have introduced? How many have actually stepped up to the plate and started spending the money on increased defence expenditure? Because I don't think many countries have.
Well, not many have, as I understand. It's a while since I looked at the figures, but like Poland has. Germany has predicted it. Estonia has. But then there's countries like Spain, which haven't, and that is part of the challenge of the European Union in terms of getting that getting those discussions, agreements, etc. together. But I think in terms of what we're doing, what the UK is doing, is supporting Ukraine, funding to the tune of £14 billion. And talking and supporting, as Keir Starmer meeting with Zelensky and Macron and others today, building that impetus. But you're right, Ian. We haven't seen, it hasn't sunk through yet, I don't think, enough in certain parts of Europe, but it needs to.
James Heale.
Yeah, I think that Keir Starmer has had a pretty good war on Ukraine thus far. I think that when it was those discussions today with the so-called E3 with the leaders of Germany and France, I think that he can point to the fact that both in this country at an elite and popular level, we have the most support for Kyiv's struggle. I think that obviously he is trying to get everyone to sort of exercise their influence over the Americans as best as possible. But I also think it would be best for the Prime Minister to make the point, of course, that the Europeans in some ways are sort of putting short-term interests over the long-term ones. This is the primary security power in Europe, and yet we're seeing reports of meetings whereby the Europeans are holding up things about sort of fishing rights, for instance, rather than actually putting the fundamental issues of European security first. If this really is going to be the crunch moment that everyone professes it is, then some of the actions we're dealing with terms of our continental partners need to match that. Obviously, I think we can regret the fact of what President Trump's doing, but the fact is he's basically shown this year, I think, the awesome power of the American presidency, just how reliant we are on American goodwill. Once that's removed, we've just got to use the cards we have. And I think that in terms of what this government's doing, it's trying to show that actually Vladimir Putin is not a sort of person operating in honest faith. He doesn't actually want to end this war. And by June next year, this conflict will have lasted longer than the First World War. So I think that the key thing for Keir Starmer, what he's doing, is obviously this great sort of game where every time the Americans talk to the Russians, they then start sort of producing documents which produce similar points to them. And it's just trying to exercise the influence we have over them and making the points about that Europeans are stepping up to it. There's more to do, clearly, but I think on Ukraine he's played it pretty well.
Anna Sabine, Liberal Democrat, what's your view on this?
Well, very similar to what's already been said, and I think Justine encapsulated it. It's very worrying. It's clear that if Putin wants peace, it's only a peace in the sense that it will have divided up Ukraine and it will leave it open to possible future invasion. I think as a party, we're broadly supportive of what the government's been doing on this. We'd like to see it doing a bit more. There's £30 billion of frozen Russian assets in the UK that we think the government should seize and send to Kyiv for its defence. And we've always advocated for a closer relationship with Europe. You may remember that we were the ones that didn't want to leave in the first place.
I do remember that.
Funnily enough, there was this little thing. And so, we continue to push for stronger, close relationships with Europe. We worry about the nature of the relationship with Trump and whether it's kind of a good relationship with him is that the price to pay is too high, whether it's around things like pharmaceuticals or online safety. I think we'd all, we've said this before, like to see a bit more Hugh Grant in Love Actually energy about standing up to Donald Trump about certain things. But broadly speaking, on the Ukraine and where we're at now, I think there's broad agreement. Sounds like we're all very worried about it.
You mentioned the seizing assets issue. Why haven't we done that? Would you like to see Labour do that?
I think we've seized a small amount. I think
they're
we've
seized,
seized
but
like 8 billion
been
or something.
used, have they?
Yeah, I don't know why. You'd have to ask the government. Sorry, I don't know. It seems like a kind of simple thing. Well, I'm sure it's not simple, but a fairly clear thing to do that would clearly help the Ukraine without us needing to spend money doing it. But as the other thing to kind of to touch on is that although we have increased our defence spending, obviously, it worries me that we're doing it at the expense of international development and international aid, because I think that stores up a lot of problems that are going to be more expensive down the line later.
Well, I would agree with regard to the cut in international aid spending in order to fund defence spending. As I just said, we need to step up our funding for defence, but cutting international aid also stores up future issues with regards to security, with regards to sort of climate change driving migration. So it's a difficult time geopolitically, and as they say, to govern is to prioritise, and the sort of the consensus around here is the support for Ukraine and the support for increased defence spending, and we have got to find the ways to make that work.
Let's just bring another question into this. Wesley in Gravesend says, is it time that we in the UK re-evaluated our relationship with the US? Trump is supporting the aggression in the Ukraine war, and our long-standing friendship with them seems to be coming to an end. What should the UK and the EU do? Who wants to take that on, James?
Well, I think that we've had this relationship for 80 years or so, where it doesn't really matter in some ways who's in Downing Street or the White House. We've had prime ministers who've put Brussels before DC in some ways. The point is the strategic interest is such that it endures, and I think that it will endure past this president. Right now, of course, we've had a whole year of Donald Trump being everywhere. He's sort of Hurricane Trump has blown through Canada up into the election there, trying to refashion the Middle East, etc. But polls suggest that after the midterms, he will be a much weaker president. Now, I would say that I think that in terms of the kind of deep relationship we have, in terms of intelligence sharing, in terms of security partnership, that is going to continue. And ultimately, we can try and sort of do our own thing. But as I say, the alternatives being either we go our own way, in which we spend billions more in terms of actually want to be a kind of world power or a much bigger power in terms of that. And the second thing is going with the Europeans. As I say, we've had this conflict raging now for more than 3 years. And I just think that on both sides, there are elements where you just don't think these are serious people.
Is it unthinkable that this long-term alliance with the United States could come to an end, particularly, for example, if J.D. Vance wins in 2028, if he succeeds Trump and he's there for another 8 years, that will be 12 years of 2 presidencies where we can't rely on the United States. NATO can't rely on the United States.
I don't think the relationship will end, but what worries me is how much we will have to kowtow to the US to sustain that relationship. You mentioned Vance. I mean, some of the stuff he said and is pushing around reproductive rights, for example, is really worrying. And I would be really disappointed if we end up with a government here next time around that thinks it's okay to tag along to what J.D. Vance thinks about things. And you can see that potential scenario if Reform do well at the next election. So I think there'll always be a relationship. There's that historic relationship. We've got the royal family, who clearly the Americans adore and feel very close to, regardless of which political party's in power. But I'm nervous about the shape that relationship is going to take in the future.
Yeah, I think I don't. Donald Trump is not I think it's not a consistent or reliable ally. But the US and our relationship with the United States is the people of the United States. It's a history, it's a heritage, it's families, and I think that will endure. But to say, for example, that that President Trump is supporting Putin in Ukraine, I don't think, 1 week it may appear that way, and then the next week it may appear differently. So I think that the challenge for us, and I think Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has done a fantastic job in maintaining a close relationship whilst maintaining differences of opinion. But the challenge for us is to have that relationship evolve. And as Justine said, the sort of America first, sovereignty first approach that the US, we see increasingly in the US, we need to reflect that in our relationship, whilst at the same time, maintaining the trade deal that we did with the US, which is so good for so many of our companies and businesses. And with regard to what you said about Vice President Vance's words about Europe and European values, as it were, I've been very pleased to see that the investments that were agreed as part of when President Trump came to visit, we haven't seen that we're rolling back, say, on online safety or other aspects of UK or European values, if you like, as a consequence of that. And I certainly want to, and I know that the committee in which I chair wants to ensure that technology, etc., it's in the interests of the British people.
Well, and there's been a pharmaceutical deal, which I think is incredibly significant.
Yes,
Justine, you wanted to come in.
I just think we'll always have hugely strong relationships with the US. I think there's just so much common ground between the two countries. I think, in a sense, it's easy to sort of get fixated on Trump and his style of presidency. I think probably where we need to end up is reflecting on the fact that he is taking a much more muscular approach. He's using America's power, but he's also pushing, I think, Europeans to take more responsibility for Europe. I think that's probably, the right thing for him to do. But we should probably be taking more responsibility for what happens in our backyard.
He did push that in his first term.
Absolutely.
And some European nations did respond, but too many didn't.
Absolutely. So you've got that, and you've got then this alternative, which was the version of America that was very participative in, the Iraq War, and if you like, far-flung, as Trump would see it, crises. Probably what's best for us is an America that's kind of somewhere in the middle, where it's willing to take a leadership role, but actually does have a slightly broader sense of its place in the world and if you like, what it can achieve for a wider, what it would call in its strategy document, Western Hemisphere. That it sees itself clearly as having a leadership role. And interestingly, it does talk about their version of social mobility, upward mobility, in this short document. And I think it's a reminder to us in Britain that actually in all of these negotiations with countries, whichever they are, we have to negotiate from a position of strength. And that means tackling the challenges we've got here at home. We'll be stronger abroad when we're stronger at home.
Right, we'll come to some more questions with our panel in just a few moments' time. If you'd like to put your own question to them, the number to call or WhatsApp is 0345 *8. On the panel, Justine Grooming, former Conservative MP and Cabinet Minister, Dame Chi Onwurah, Labour MP for Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West, Anna Sabine, Liberal Democrat MP for Frome and East Somerset, and James Heale, Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. A text question from Kieran in Earl's Court. Is the ongoing challenge to kick off the grooming gang's inquiry evidence in itself that fear of a perception of racism against certain ethnic minorities is considered to be a bigger concern than child abuse amongst some in our political establishment? Now, the Conservative leader, I nearly said Keir Badenoch. Now, that would be an interesting mix, wouldn't it? Kemi Badenoch has today set out a blueprint for a national inquiry, arguing it must consider the role of ethnicity, religion, and other cultural factors. James.
Well, on the first point, I do think it's clear that there has been at times reports, I think it was done by Dame Alexis Jay, talking about how people's concerns about being seen as saying the wrong thing were put above child safety. So I don't think that's a necessarily uncontroversial point. In terms of the government's handling on this, I think that we really have a sort of problem with our inquiries in this country, which often we're done to take the politics out of something, kick it into the long grass. And actually, of course, when there's a thing here about urgent justice needing to be done, I do think there is a need for an inquiry into our inquiries, if you will, in terms of the Inquiries Act 2005 and how we deal with that. Clearly, of course, there are big questions here, but sometimes you have to say no, and actually inertia is an active choice as well. And I do think that this issue has rumbled on throughout the whole year. There needs to be an inquiry, and it needs to be done pretty soon, sharpish, and certainly not like the ones we've had recently, where it's been stretching into a decade or so.
Anna, why do you think there's been a delay?
Goodness knows why there's been a delay, but I do know that everyone claims to have the victims, or think that the victims of sexual abuse should be at the heart of this, and too often they're not, and this is being used as a political issue. I wrote to Ofcom recently about the fact that GB News had done a whole segment on whether, people with foreign-sounding names have committed more crimes than people with British-sounding names. As someone whose surname is Sabine, I don't know whether it sounds British or foreign, but...
Have I been pronouncing it wrong?
You have been, but I don't mind at all. It's very charming, Sabine.
Because I did actually ask about this earlier.
Don't worry. I nearly said Sabine just to please you, actually, but that's not how I pronounce it.
Where does that come from?
Well, apparently it's Roman Italian originally, because you've got like the Sabine women, right? And, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't deny that this issue is being weaponised. We would, like everyone else, like to see the politics removed from this. Well, I say like everyone else. I don't feel like every party does want the politics removed from it. Sorry. We would like the politics removed from it. We would like the inquiry to get established, because it's very clear that the victims of those particular instances need that to happen. And I don't know why it's taking a long time. And then going forwards, your questioner refers to kind of sexual abuse in different kind of places or categories. I don't think it's particularly helpful to kind of pick out the background of where the abuse is from. Abuse is abuse, and we need to look at why it happens, why we have a growing culture of misogyny, and everything needs to be dealt with through the law in an objective fashion. And I think it behooves politicians not to... Some of the stuff that's been done in the chamber about this, there was a particular Conservative politician who read out some incredibly graphic descriptions of sexual abuse for no reason that I could discern other than to try and get a point scored in a local or in the national papers about what they were saying about grooming gangs. And I thought that was abhorrent, and that does not serve victims' best interests.
But if there is a cultural aspect to it, then surely if you try and sweep that under the carpet, then there will be all sorts of people drawing their own conclusions.
I'm not advocating sweeping it under the carpet. We want this inquiry into what's happening in Rotherham, and if there's sexual abuse in other organisations, then that needs to be looked at as well. But it all needs to be looked at objectively, and we need to calmly try and understand why it happens and how it's happened and how we can avoid it happening in the future. And it must not be used as a way of weaponising against one group of people in this country, because that's not fair.
Okay, Chi.
I think it's absolutely right to put the experience and the voices of the victims as centrally as possible. And for years, for decades, in so many cases, they have not been heard and they have not been believed. And it was the grooming gangs, the rape gangs, what you call it, is like a dark period in our history, and it is ongoing. And we had a grooming gang in Newcastle, and having spoken, and heard some of the experiences, and so it's horrendous, and it's horrendous that happened. I think it is true. I mean, and I think one of the reports said that in certain cases there was a reluctance to talk about the ethnicity of the perpetrators because presumably of a fear of being seen racist, which I think that just does no one any good. It is a form of racism, actually. But the issue was, because when I looked into this, when we had this called the Spice Review in Newcastle, the data wasn't there. The data, they didn't collect the data, and we should just say this is under Conservative government. They did not collect the data on the ethnicity of the perpetrators. So and sometimes not even on the ethnicity of the victims either. So you couldn't actually come to conclusions. Now, as I understand it, what we have done and what has been to ensure, to put in place, whether it's systems or processes, that the ethnicity is recorded. And then if we do see, correlations, etc., then it is right that we should investigate those. But in terms of the grooming gang inquiry, it's very complicated. It's been a challenge to put those victims' voices centre and yet have an inquiry with a leadership, etc., which victims and everyone can support.
And that's a real problem at the moment, isn't it? Because it seems to be that the victims who have formed a group, half of them think Just Phillips is taking the right approach,
yes,
and half of them don't. So it's quite difficult to say. And you must have been, Justine, as a cabinet minister, I don't know whether you've been in any similar situation where you want to get something underway, but you can't because half of the people won't cooperate with it.
I think it's very difficult. I think it's got a lot harder. And this is what happens when we're living in a version of Britain where people just simply don't feel the need to ever find some common ground. Where there is division, then that wins out. And so what it's meaning is that on a whole range of issues, often very sensitive topics where we really need people to listen to one another and find some common ground to be able to move forward, because we are all here in one country. We can't not do that. I'm afraid we get nowhere. And we're now getting to the stage where, because our politics cannot find common ground, and indeed seems to sort of almost delight in not finding any common ground, actually people from outside the system who might have stepped forward to chair what would be a very sensitive but important political, non-political inquiry just simply think, I don't want to be part of this. I'm not going to be somebody that ends up being a political football. And I think there are some genuine questions as to how Westminster ends where it is now, because this is just the latest of, I think, a number of areas where the inability to find common ground to move forward on behalf of a wider country is gridlocking politics, and we're not getting anywhere, and all it's doing is allowing more and more extreme views as people get more and more desperate for something to happen to shift Britain forward.
And I'm going to assume that my colleagues in our digital team are going to clip what you've just said and put it out on Twitter. What do you think the reaction to that will be?
Who knows? There'll be some people who say, oh, what a shame Justine Greening isn't in politics, very sensible voice. There'll be other people who say, thank God, you're not there now, you don't understand. But
she's never been a proper Conservative, that's what they'll say.
Of course, the reality is I grew up in Rotherham. I know exactly what that town's like. And I know exactly the stresses and strains of a community that's very mixed. I understand exactly why people are so angry and feeling often like they want to vote for reform, because access to opportunity has not improved since the time I was there as a 10-year-old, thinking I'm going to have to leave Rotherham when I get older because I'm not going to be able to have the kind of career that I want. That's why people are frustrated in this country. And I think when they see important issues like this just somehow gridlocked by the political system, unable to move them forward, it just seems to reinforce this sense that everything's just stopped working.
But isn't part of the problem that if you put it on X, what you're mainly going to get is abuse, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I was going to say.
Absolutely right.
And actually, if you look at one of the things that struck me as a newish...
You're not on it, are you?
I am now.
Oh, you are?
Well, I went back when I became the culture, media and sports spokesperson and was like, oh my God, this is a barn fire. And one of the things that strikes me as a newish MP is that in Parliament, there are loads of ways in which we have common ground and we have shared working and we try and resolve issues constructively together, whether it's legislatively or on committees or whatever. And but the public perception of politics is so black and white, and things like needing to get clicks on news sites and things like social media just aggravate that. And there are certain, I think, kind of bad actors in our political system who encourage that. But actually, your average politician is trying to seek common ground with other people and do good things.
I agree with that. I just don't think it makes the news, and so people don't see it, and that's part of the challenge as well.
But also because I know very well that you're more likely, you will get more comments from those who are at the extremes, and you'll get more aggressive and insulting comments. And that is the committee, my committee on science, innovation and technology, our investigation into algorithms and social media showed how the advertising is driven by polarization, because you are more likely to click on something that gives you that makes you feel strongly about something. And so unless we get to as my committee recommended, look at the algorithms and how advertising drives sensationalism, and take away, follow the money and take away or reduce those incentives, then we're just going to get more and more polarized.
Well, my algorithm just gives me dog videos. Now I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy with that.
Ian?
Well, I don't know. There are a few others as well, but that's a predominant one. Right, we'll take more questions from you in just a few moments' time here on LBC. It's 8:31 news headlines with Kate.
With Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:34, it's Cross Question. Let me reintroduce my panel. James Heale is Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator. If you haven't heard enough of him on this hour, you can download the latest edition of the Presidents, Prime Ministers, Monarchs and Dictators podcast, where he talks about the brief premiership of Liz Truss as
the Prime Minister, not a dictator, yes.
No, not a dictator.
In the podcast series. Yes, good fun. It was quite a short episode, wasn't it?
Reasonably, yeah.
In both senses.
Less than 49 minutes. Anna Sabine is a Liberal Democrat MP for Frome and East Somerset, and she is the party's culture, media and sports spokesperson. Now, did you get that immediately you became an MP?
No, I just got it. I was Ed Davies PPS for the first year.
Well, now that's a challenging job. Well, what secrets can you tell us?
I can't obviously tell you any secrets or I would be killed, but I was moved to the much safer brief of culture, media and sport.
Onwurah, Dame. Now, were you a Dame last time you came on the programme? I think you've been elevated since then.
I have been elevated.
How has it changed your life?
Oh, well...
Do you get better tables in restaurants?
I don't eat that out that much, but I get there's a man in one of my local markets who now salutes me every time I walk by.
And Justine Greening,
he has a smile.
Justine Greening, why are you not a dame? Surely you merit at least a damehood, if not a peerage.
Oh, I don't know. I'm probably too down to earth to have any of that stuff. I don't know. You'd have to ask the powers that be.
You come from Rotherham. That's probably scuppered you.
No, I think that's enough.
Right, let's go to a question from Holly in Mansfield. Nearly 1 million young people aren't doing anything with their lives. Are they just lazy, or should I feel sorry for them? Now, official figures for the summer of this year said there were almost 950,000 people aged 16 to 24 across the UK who are not working or doing any kind of educational training programme. Around half of this number are on benefits. Well, as the youngest person on this panel, James, I think.
You assume that, Ian?
I think journalism is counts as the job in this. I think there's a couple of things. One of which, of course, 16 to 24, the primary sort of public policy impact on their life will be COVID. And I think we are still living through that. I think it's very fashionable to talk about politics in day-to-day, weekly, monthly terms. But actually, this is one of the huge things. This is the equivalent to kind of the sociological upheaval you'd get from sort of the Second World War. This is a huge thing which is going to play out for many years. And I think the anxiety and the impact it's had on young people's health, their motivations, that's all going to play out. I also think that for far too long we've had a politics that's been skewed to slightly older demographics and no one's actually representing their interests. Good luck to the government, I'd say, in trying to get this over the line. But I would just contrast, for instance, the kind of way in which you have a huge campaign still going on for WASPy women, which I personally think is pretty indefensible, compared to, for instance, the people who are suffering from graduate student debt, which there is almost no party kind of speaking to right now. So I think that there's a number of different things. There's a political constituency that's not being represented right now. In terms of why they aren't doing things, it's because of long-term issues caused by COVID. And I think right now it needs to be a sort of cultural shift, and one that shows actually you're going to get young people, it is advantageous to be in work and they can build their lives and accumulate capital and build the lives they can in their 20s and 30s. So it's huge long-term systemic issues. And as a practicing young person, I'd just say good luck to any young person listening to this, and things can get better if you do put your shoulders to the wheel.
You may still be practicing, but you've got quite good at it. Justine.
So I agree with James. I think I'd add to that AI and what that's doing, particularly to entry-level jobs, and loads of businesses rethinking those starter roles that were often a gateway into a career. And I think it has got tougher, actually. I think on education, I think it's harder to get on the housing ladder. And I think you're absolutely right, James, that there hasn't really been that voice out there speaking for 20-something, 30-something. The average age of a voter in Putney when I represented it was about 37. And I felt I was often a lone voice talking about some of those issues. And I look at the journey I went on, the house I'll get to go back to tonight that I was able to buy when I'd got myself a career at PwC as an accountant. I wasn't an MP at that time. There's no way I could afford that house going on that same journey. So in other words, the link between effort and reward has significantly decoupled. And I think that's what you're seeing in terms of the frustration of young people. But we do need to do something about it. And I think we need to have a much more sophisticated policy.
I mean, it's not a new problem, is it? I mean, the scale of it may be more
I think
now.
It's a broader problem now.
I mean, do you look back on your period when you were Education Secretary and think, if only I'd done that, it could have actually helped people in this generation now?
No, because I didn't have long enough. And I brought forward a social mobility action plan. We introduced the apprenticeship levy, which should have been reformed, significantly faster after I introduced it than it was. We got businesses into the DFE for the first time. Literally, we held a skills summit where they came through the doors, and the importance of that was the officials seeing the employers that we were developing talent for. So we really left no stone unturned, but did you need to have a much longer term momentum built up over all of that? Absolutely,
okay.
Yes.
Anna?
I've got 5 16 to 24-year-olds in my immediate blended family, and I feel very sympathetic with them, not just because they're mine, but because they have been... traumatised is a very strong word, but something's happened around COVID that I don't think we fully understand with that generation.
We had a brilliant call in the last hour explaining this.
The mental health crisis is huge, and the treatments are years and years away. And so if you want any help with that, if your parents can't pay for you to get support, you don't get support. In a semi-rural constituency like mine, they cannot get to a job if there is one. They can't get a bus, they're too irregular. They can't get driving tests. They're waiting up to a year, 2 years, some places for driving tests. As James said, we're not really targeting anything at supporting young people. What the government, I guess, is targeting is apprenticeships. which I think we think are a good thing. But the problem with apprenticeships is that in order to drive up the number of apprenticeships, Skills England is reducing the amount of things people need to do to achieve those apprenticeships, to the extent that the construction sector has actually written to the Prime Minister and said, you are devaluing these apprenticeships to the extent that we will, if we are not careful, we will not accredit these apprenticeships. We will not have these apprentices working in our industries because you're making the...
So this announcement today might not be all that it seems.
Well, not at all. And actually, if you read up on it, there's all kinds of sectors, food and drink, manufacturing, that are saying trying to get more people into apprenticeships by devaluing those apprenticeships means that we are not getting the workforce we need. And that has a huge knock-on impact. So if we really want to give young people apprenticeships, they've got to be apprenticeships of value, and you've got to properly support it, not kind of offer them as a political headline, but really make them not necessarily not worth the paper they're written on. I don't want to devalue apprenticeships young people are doing, but there are a lot of industries that are very concerned about what these apprenticeships are going to look like.
Okay, She?
Well, I mean, I would say to your listener, don't feel sorry for young people and don't write them off as lazy, but support them, and that is exactly what the Labour government is trying to do with investing in young people, in education and in apprenticeships. I grew up in a council estate in Newcastle, and I think about what was different then was that this was in the 70s. Most of the families on that council estate were in work, in long-term work. Before Margaret Thatcher got to destroying all the local industry, we had excellent schools.
How could you?
We had excellent schools just around the corner, with teachers who had the time and the ability to focus and support young people without anything like me. And we did have pathways into apprenticeships, a lot of apprenticeships from industry, as well as I was able to go to university, and I didn't pay for my university tuition. So I do think today's announcement about apprenticeships, and particularly apprenticeships focused on young people, because a lot of the growth in apprenticeships, and is been for older, more mature apprenticeships. These are apprenticeships for young people.
But you take Anna's point.
There's always discussions about the sort of the quality. I mean, my understanding was that a lot of the apprenticeships that were offered in the last few years were short-term apprenticeships. These are longer-term apprenticeships, and there's also going to be more emphasis on ensuring that young people can be supported and guided into them through training and through changing the rules around the around GCSE English and Maths. So that's they have to be high quality apprenticeships, but we see that also in the transition plan for the North Sea, for example, where we're investing in clean energy transition and supporting people into those skills, and particularly in the AI skills apprenticeships as well. So it's so important to give opportunities to young people and to talk that up. I do think there needs to be a rebalancing on the opportunities for young people and the investment in young people versus that for older people.
And I think there's one big missing ingredient here, which is an entrepreneurship path. So we talk about academic routes, we talk about vocational routes, but actually what about the whole swathe of young people who just want to do their own thing, and we need to give them the skills to be able to set up their own businesses, get employing people, grow them. We never talk about that. And I think the sooner we can actually start thinking there's a third pathway, particularly for this generation, that are more individualistic, they want to do influencers.
No access to capital, that's the problem, isn't it?
But that's not a reason not to develop it, and actually enabling them to understand about business cases, how maths works in all of this, how to pitch your business idea, maybe getting the banks, as you say, on board. Maybe I find it crazy that we're willing to allow people to borrow money, say, to go to university. Well, what about allowing young people to have some capital to start a business if actually that's a business case that looks like it's something that's sensible for them to get on with? I just think we've got to free up the talent to find its own opportunities, as well as improving the pathways that we've already got.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, you said in your point that there was previously existing youth unemployment, but there were things like the YTS scheme, which, according to some, I think one of our writers suggested that led to Oasis. So Mrs. Thatcher invented Oasis, the band, which so I'm not sure they acknowledge that sort of lineage. But the point being is that you look at the resources dedicated, for instance, the over 65s with the triple lock, the billions that we spend on that. It is so much more existential than just simply apprenticeships. And my concern is the state is that that we are basically bankrupting ourselves because we are borrowing more and more. We can't keep affording it. And actually, it would be a sensible state that recognised that getting people into work, breaking that link between youth and welfare in some cases would actually help the state get the tax it's going to need to pay for all this stuff in many, many years. And my concern is when you get this patronising element that people say, younger, etc. It's also about all the social contract which has been completely skewed to a generation which is now approaching retirement, and actually the younger ones just simply want to, as Justine says, get their foot on the ladder and the boot off the neck.
Yeah, and it's lives off track that cost money, not lives that are on track and successful. This is a win-win.
Just quick key point. I think it was Howard from Take That was on a YTS scheme, not Oasis, but I may have to check that.
But I met a chief executive.
He was the one that couldn't sing, was he?
I'm not commenting on which one to Take That couldn't sing.
I met a construction chief executive last week who started on YTS.
There you go. See, Margaret Thatcher wasn't all that evil.
Logistics. He was running a logistics.
Well, in fact, Margaret Thatcher did inspire fantastic music from the Clash and the punk and the Jam, etc. So you're right. There is definitely a musical dividend, even if there were hundreds of thousands of jobs left.
Right, more questions to come. It's 8:46.
This is LBC. While all the 060973.
8:48 on our panel, Justine Greening, Dame Chi Onwurah, Anna Sabine and James Heale. Now let's take this next question from Rico in Kingsbury. How can being horrible on social media be worthy of a criminal record? Well, the former footballer Joey Barton has been given a 6-month suspended prison sentence for making 6 social media posts about football pundits Eni Aluko and Lucy Ward and the broadcaster Jeremy Vine after he was found guilty of sending grossly offensive electronic communications with an intent to cause distress or anxiety. Within these posts, he used an offensive word to claim Vine was a paedophile, while he compared Aluko and Ward's on-air style to the serial killers Fred and Rosemary West. Well, just to prove that social media is not all bad, Wesley in Gravesend says, Justine Greening proves that there are sensible Tories out there. She talks sense. And Thomas says, good God, we need people like Justine Greening back in politics, somebody who can actually answer a question and not reply with word salad rubbish from a PR team. I don't think that was aimed at you two, by the way.
I'm sad about that.
Right. Who would like to go? Anna, you're head of the culture. This is presumably a subject that you spend a lot of time thinking about.
Well, I spent some time thinking about Joey Barton. It's not an extensive use of my time. I'm a real soggy liberal, so I'm very pro-free speech. And when I saw this in the news today, I thought, we probably agreed a bit with your call, or we should, and we do need to be careful about defending free speech. But then I read what he'd actually said, and what he actually said was vile. And Joey Barton has 3 million followers, and I think as politicians, it's always a good idea to respect the court's process, and it's been through a court process. As the judge said, he was not of previously good character. He had a lot of form in other areas, and that probably gets taken into account. So I think that I'm actually slightly torn on as a party, the Lib Dems have asked for like a cross-party look at the Online Safety Act and for us to come up with some common agreement on what we think is acceptable in terms of free speech online. But I think that in an era where we've seen some really poor examples of online speech leading to potentially violent actions, protests, those kind of things, we have to be really careful what we're saying. And in this case, I have to say, having read what he said, I wasn't at all surprised he was convicted.
Do you think there is a case for the internet, social media, to be regulated in the same way that Ofcom regulates me?
I sit on the Standards Committee in Parliament, and we had Ofcom come along and tell us all about the ways in which they regulate the news. And then you discover that the vast majority of people aren't getting their news online on the normal news channels. They're getting it from places like YouTube, and young people hugely getting their news from places like YouTube or TikTok. So personally, I'd like to look at how we regulate it, and whether it's Ofcom or someone else regulating it. I think if we're not getting our news from those traditional sources, but we think news is worth regulating, then we should be regulating it.
Okay,
Well, of course, I know Joey Barton from when he was playing for Newcastle. And as Anna said, this is not his first rodeo when it comes to criminal behaviour. And the idea, when people say this, that nothing should happen if you say something online, we live so much of our lives online. We learn online. We influence online. Our children grow up online. And are you really saying that what you can say anything you want online? It can be sent to millions, hundreds of millions, by algorithms which emphasise the most sensational and sometimes the most vile posts, and that there should be no criminal context to that? Are you saying that are you really proposing that what happens online is not part of the real world? The law applies online just as it applies in the studio here, and the law says that if you incite, if you're vile or if you incite certain crimes, then there's a legal consequence, and we saw that particularly after the Southport riots. So I'm not going to comment on the sentencing, etc., but I think on the principle that if you say something which breaks the law online, then you should be held to account for it.
James.
Well, look, we've always had laws limiting free speech in this country. You think, obviously, theatre censorship up until 1968. You think that actually, particular things in this case would have been about libel and would have been about incitement as well. And I think that if you are going after someone and using them a word specifically in this context, I don't necessarily see why they should therefore be exempt from the laws if they wrote it in print versus if they wrote it online. In terms of news consumption, more news now is consumed online than it is offline. I think this year was the tipping point in that. And look, he's obviously a very dislikable man. Some of the stuff he's been saying, I'm not going to defend him, not just because I'm an Arsenal fan, but I think that, he was repeatedly exhibiting this kind of bad behaviour. We've always had a discussion around where the limits are on free speech in this country. You think, of course, to borrow from America, the Oliver Wendell Holmes case about shouting fire in a packed theatre. So I think that, this is, it's almost an inevitability, which is that if you do keep saying that someone's a sort of bike nonce, etc. online, you're probably going to find the ramifications for that.
Justine.
I agree. I think he just broke the law. I think it's pretty straightforward. We've got laws around slander and libel. We've got laws around saying things that put other people directly into harm's way. He just broke the law. It's as simple as that. And I think you have to have some kind of balance that if you have that many people following you, actually you have more responsibility for taking care over what you say.
The reason he's got that many people following him is because he says stuff like this.
Precisely why the law should then kick in. Do you see what I mean? Like, if it was just one man in his boxer shorts, with 2 followers, maybe it doesn't matter. But actually, when it's somebody with 3 million, it does, and that's why the law works.
Okay,
and
right.
Just to say, there should also be responsibilities for the platforms for amplifying that kind of harmful and indeed criminal behaviour.
David in Camden says, if we can pay for 24/7 security for a Prime Minister whose tenure was outlived by a lettuce, surely we can pay for security for the ad hoc visits by the son of the King. Now, a bit of background to this. We're actually going to be talking about this after 9 o'clock, so I'd be interested in everybody's views after 9. Home Office civil servants will now be reviewing the decision to remove taxpayer-funded security from Prince Harry before he next visits the UK in January for the next stage of his legal case against the publisher of the Daily Mail. Again, I'll come to you, Anna, first on this.
Well, as an MP who, like other MPs, is offered security for public-facing events, because sadly those are the times we live in, it would be very hypocritical of me to want to deny it to Prince Harry. I think any decisions on how the state funds security for public figures should be taken on the basis of evidence of a threat, and taken on that basis. It should be nothing to do with wider context about whether you're Team Harry and Meghan or Team Kate and William.
Just which are you?
I'm not saying
Justine?
Well, I get David's point, to be perfectly honest, and I think it gets you into a discussion around what's a proportionate level of risk these two different people. I'd have thought probably Prince Harry has significantly a higher risk profile around him than maybe Liz Truss. Maybe I'm wrong, but in a sense, people who have access to doing those sorts of assessments need to do them. And, it may be over time that Harry rebuilds his relationship with the royal family here, and maybe people will feel differently about making his security something that we pay for.
But to play devil's advocate here, shouldn't we also consider the fact that he made a big play of wanting to withdraw from public life in this country, that he doesn't have any royal duties anymore?
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair point. I don't disagree with that. I think it's where do you draw the line? I mean, obviously, nobody would want him to come back and get attacked if he knew there was a risk against him either.
And he may have chosen to withdraw, but he can't choose not to be a public figure in this country when he comes. And I think the issue here is also that there is access to intelligence that only the Home Office or the police can do, so he can't bring private security or whatever. There's access to intelligence, and we know today.
But if they had the intelligence that there was a threat to him, then obviously they would then protect him, wouldn't they?
Well, they have to. Well, I'm not sure. You're saying that. Would he not need to have? Would he not need to have protection in order for them to look for the intelligence? I mean, I know that for example, saying for myself, you have to ask for the police to look for if there's any intelligence on threats towards you. There's so much out there. There's so much out there that it actually has to be.
Okay, James.
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, in terms of sort of the set rules, isn't it? And I can understand they need to draw a line, because otherwise we can say we should spend money on everyone forever and give everyone as much security as they want. Equally, I kind of agree that it should be on the threat base. Now, I take a slightly different view. I don't necessarily think that, I mean, from the outside, they're sort of particularly hated figures, people don't like them, etc. But look, if there is intelligence, they're actually going to be the victim of terror threat, of course we should provide that. And, if something were to ever happen, I think you could see a terrifying kind of precursor to that when Salman Rushdie got attacked last year. And so, look, if there needs to be security, they should have it. Obviously, I completely appreciate that the Met Police needs to have somewhere to draw the lines, otherwise they could provide security forever. And I do think it was quite funny. I think that the Home Office, the only time they've ever won a case seems to be against Prince Harry. But, we'll see how that goes in the future.
Obviously not fit for purpose.
Absolutely not.
Right, our fun question comes from Kai. Today, Sir Sadiq Khan announced a white stork colony will return to London after 600 years alongside bees, beavers, no stringing at the back please, and bats. Which animal would the panel like to see reintroduced into their local areas?
Well, I would personally, if I could choose any animal to come back into the North
Alan
East.
Shearer.
World-beating football team, but we have that already, and you just don't recognise it yet. I'd love to see like how a woolly mammoth would walk the streets of Newcastle, but I understand that it might not be good for the pavements or for my constituents. So actually, I'm going to go for red squirrels because we did have them in my lifetime, and unfortunately, they're being reintroduced in the Highlands, and I hope they're going to migrate into Newcastle.
That would involve killing all the grey squirrels, wouldn't it? Because otherwise they wouldn't exist. But I'm not going to dub you a squirrel killer.
Sure I take the grey squirrel advocacy, but I'm not sure you have to kill them all to get some red squirrels.
Happily, in Frome and East Somerset, we already have beavers. We're very lucky. So I'm going to pivot like a good politician and say I think we need more native plants. I used to work for a wild plant conservation charity called Plant Life, and I know that we need lots more of our native plants to thrive.
Isn't that a band?
There was also, that was Park Life with Blur, I think.
I was thinking of Westlife. Justine.
In a very limited, controlled way, I'm going for pygmy goats because I think they can play a vital role in making people smile whilst also clearing up all available rubbish that's possible to eat that has been left out. So, I think London would just be a bit tidier.
Okay, James.
I'm going to go for the humble house sparrow because growing up, I read all these great books about how this was native to my garden, but I live in southwest London and it's just parakeets everywhere. And I love the parakeets initially, but now they've sort of become the mundane. They've become the pigeons of Richmond. And honestly, they're out there sort of like Hitchcockian style, these everyday massive...
This counts as a first world problem in Richmond, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Too many parakeets.
It's a few magpies, but now it's just parakeets. So I'd bring back the humble house sparrow, I'd say.
Right, well, thank you all very much for coming on the show tonight. Tomorrow, we have podcaster and chair of the Labour Muslim Network, Ali Milani, the think tanker and columnist Phoebe Arslanidjic-Little, and MPs Will Stone from Labour and Harriet Cross from the Conservatives. Coming up in the next hour, though, we're going to return to the subject of Prince Harry's security. Ministers will have no role in deciding whether to reinstate Prince Harry's taxpayer-funded armed police protection when he visits the UK. The Royal and VIP Executive Committee, RAVEC, which is overseen by the Home Office, has launched a fresh risk assessment of the Duke of Sussex's security, sources have confirmed to The Times. So I want to ask you this. If Prince Harry is still no longer a member of the royal family, has no royal duties, why should the British taxpayer pay for his security, particularly when he and his wife are raking in millions in America? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From
Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. EU leaders have reportedly made positive progress towards using seized Russian assets to pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Sir Keir Starmer hosted Volodymyr Zelensky along with the leaders of France and Germany at Downing Street today. The meeting focused on the peace plan for Ukraine proposed by the US and how potential problems and disagreements can be resolved. Tan Deshi is the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee.
The UK must reject the concept of peace as conveyed by Russia in terms of they want Ukraine